God's word, people's need together, and application. What we've been thinking about this week in particular is topical preaching, or I would prefer the title verse with verse exposition. So you get a theme, you get a topic, and then you say, what does God's word say about that? Now, it's still exposition, because exposition deals with the content of the scriptures. And really, that's what we're about as preachers. A preacher is someone who is dealing with God's word. That's what we're trying to bring to people. Not our word, but God's word. So in this case, it's verse with verse exposition. You look at your theme. So we think about that grid. Collect and categorize. Research and reflect. Apply. And we haven't got to arrange yet. Now, the task is, the mission is, if you have to choose to accept it, because that's the kind of the course, is to choose a topic, a theme, and to produce a short word on that. So, are we in a position now to say, what have you chosen? Have you made a decision? Okay, so what have you chosen?
Meditation.
Meditation, wow, yeah. There we go, good. Love, okay. It's great to make that quite expansive, isn't it? You've got a lot to choose from. So, Stuart?
Relationships.
Okay, relationships, great. So,
Guilt and forgiveness.
Guilt and forgiveness, okay. Are you preaching?
Baptism.
Baptism, wow, okay, brilliant. Good stuff. So obviously what you want to do now is you're collecting certain scriptures to that theme. It might be that for some of you, you think about other words which might relate to that in the Bible. So obviously you're going to need to get some sort of concordance to look those up. Collect and categorize. You would look at some of those scriptures. Now, obviously, things like love, that's a big thing, isn't it? So you're going to have to somehow narrow that down. But it might be that when you look at some of the scriptures you've got, some of them already, there are already themes which you can detect. Okay, so you're already looking at the scriptures, and you can already categorize as you look at some of those things. Research and reflect. So research is the technical part of the sermon preparation. So you're looking at the scriptures you use, and you need to understand what is God's word saying, taking into consideration the context. Reflection is the meditation on that, so that you're kind of reflecting about what those scriptures mean. Application, and we talked about this yesterday, and in particular that's what we're kind of looking for this week. Make your points your applications, and your applications your points, and we'll think a little bit more about that today. So that's the mission. Right, so where are we up to? I think we're up to arrange. Apply and arrange. Ecclesiastes 12:9, the preacher arranged many proverbs. Okay, are you ready with a pen here, or ready with your typing? The text, that's the Bible text, the text should determine the substance of your message, but the way people hear and learn should determine the structure of your message. The text should determine the substance of your message, but the way people hear and learn should determine the structure of your message. Now, that's actually a really important statement, that, isn't it? Because again, it emphasizes the critical nature of exposition, so that the substance of what we share is going to come from God's word. So therefore, whatever style of preaching you're engaged in the end, it's about expositing God's word. So the text should determine the substance, but the way people hear and learn should determine the structure of your message. And again, the context is supreme there, isn't it? And who you're speaking to, the sort of people you're speaking to, in many ways is going to determine the way you structure that message. Does that make sense? So, let's just have a look at this idea again. If I'm dealing with a lot of unchurched people, And actually, I'm thinking very much of a lot of young people as well. I'm thinking about the base here, whose concentration span might not be that great. Okay. I'm going to start on this. I'm going to start over here. People's needs. Now, we see that common in the Gospels. Jesus started often where people were. It's that point of connection. But again, we don't leave people there because that would just be some sort of self-help inspirational talk. In the end, we want to bring God's word and people's need together in application. But where you start on that continuum will be determined by who you're speaking to. But in the end, the substance of the message is God's word, yeah? So even if I start over on this side, so for instance, I'm dealing with a group of Christians who are they value God's word, they treasure God's word above all things, they don't need to be convinced that God's word is beneficial. So you can start right here. So I can say, let's open God's word and see what he says. And immediately people say, yay, because they're ready. But actually, you still need to be aware of their needs too. Because God's word needs to be rooted in our lives, in the reality of our circumstances. So God's word, people's need together, and application. Okay, here are some typical sermon structures. Point A. So you've got 4 points. Point describing the text, point describing the text, point describing the text, point describing the text, and then a bit of application at the end. Okay, fair enough. Here's another one. Point describing the text, application. Point describing the text, application, and so on. Okay, well, there we go. How about this as an idea? If the point of the message is application, why not lead off with that? So, present tense application statement, and then the content of the text. Present tense application statement, and then the content of the text. Present tense application statement, and then the content of the text. In other words, you're making your points your applications, and your applications your points. Does that make sense? So if the point of the message is application, then my application should be my points. So here are some ideas how to arrange your outline for maximum impact. Number 1, keep it simple. Keep it simple.
What do you mean by that?
Reduce your insights to a few key points. I'll give you an example. I was at a wedding years ago. In fact, the person, it was a friend of mine, a couple, they're both ordained now, but the person who married them is now actually the Archbishop of York, very important. He's an African clergyman, he's from Uganda in the end, originally. So he had been speaking, they got married and he was giving the word, and he had been speaking for about 20 minutes, and then this is no word of a lie, he said, and now my final 15 points. So, okay. Keep it simple. Yeah? Because there's actually, in the end, there's a limit to what I can take in. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There's a limit to what I can take in. Haddon Robinson said this: television has destroyed linear thinking. Television has destroyed. Now, if you have a look at television now, popular programs are often designed in what I call a magazine format. So if you have a look, no single segment is more than a few minutes long. So you're moving quickly. And there isn't necessarily a logical order to it. It's just all sorts of segments coming at you. Now, I think there are some people we need to realise, and I'm thinking of the base in particular, because the age profile on the whole is fairly young. Young people have been brought up with that sort of media, which is actually why people think that our brains are actually being affected by that. In the past, in the olden days, people used to read a book, okay? And so when you read a book, you start at the top and you just work through it. Then you turn the page. Now, most people now read stuff not in printed form, but on a screen. And people read on the internet in a very different way. They scan read. Yeah? So they don't read every word. They are looking for things. So actually, and people are concerned that our brains, you actually reteach your brain. You hardwire your brain to perceive information in a different way. It is actually quite concerning, this. So I think we need to be aware of who we're speaking to. But just a caution, although television might have destroyed linear thinking, I still think there is a case about an argument which has logic to it. So although when you look at media today, and now here's another example about media, by the way. When I watch, the most stuff I watch on TV, live TV, is sport. So we have in the UK we have Sky TV, it's a satellite channel, and we bought that for sport. For cricket, so because you can only get it on, and then also for football, soccer. Yeah. Now on the screen, if you have a look at a screen, you can often see 7 sources of information. There is maybe the studio, then there's a banner over the top with news coming in. There's often something on the right hand side with other information, and then there's some. Have you seen that? So the screen, yeah, multiple blocks, and it's what I call the MTV generation. So that we're used to being bombarded. Now that's, young people will just look at that screen and they wouldn't think anything of it. And you're processing all sorts of information. Older people can't do that. Because they've never done it. So effectively what it is, it's just a jumble of information. That's interesting. So, but although that's the case, it seems that we're being bombarded with information. We still, even though life might seem random, we still want to make sense of it in an orderly way. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Although it seems that we're just being bombarded with information, we still want to make sense in an orderly way. So although that's true, I still think if I'm preparing a message, I want there to be some sort of movement and momentum which has some sort of logic to it. Yeah? But you're going to need to, if I was, again, speaking to lots of young people, then I would be aware of that, the way people process information. We also use in our church, we use a multimedia backdrop to everything we do. Everything we do. There's always something on the screen. But I also have to, if it was up to me, we would perhaps use that far more, because I would want to actually put up all sorts of information, even though it might not be related to what I'm saying at the time. But older people find that really distracting. So, now what I'm going to speak about tomorrow is in some ways simple. But if people really listen, it will raise far more questions than I answer. And actually, if people really process it, there will be people who come and say, I have real problems with that. Although this doctrine, I'm going to be speaking about the sovereignty of God and God's providence. This has been the mainstay. It is the mainstay of a biblical worldview. It has been the thing which has been the foundational idea behind Christian living for 2,000 years. But it's something in our modern world, for all sorts of reasons, and I might explain that this afternoon, we find difficulty with. So although the gospel is simple, and we need to learn how to do that, it's not simplistic. In the world today, The world is a complex world, and it's interesting, sometimes politicians try and come up with simple answers, but there are no simple answers to complex issues. Sometimes the answers are complex, and this is the thing about maturity, maturing as a Christian, and that sometimes the answers I get are concerning. You know, I think there is a sense if I'm honest, something I'm praying for a lot at the moment is that we learn to live with the fear of God, the awesomeness of God, the holiness of God. The problem is in our generation, and I'll explain this afternoon, and I'll explain this to the base. I think we're used now to getting answers quickly, to getting information quickly. And we find it very difficult when God says, wait, or actually this side of eternity you're not going to know. And actually that might be the case. Do we struggle with that? Absolutely. To the iPhone generation, I haven't got my phone with me, but in my pocket, I have access effectively to the world's information. I can tell you where I am via sat-nav. I can be in contact with people instantly. I can get answers to questions instantly. And that starts to change our perception. And we think God should be like that. And we find it very difficult when God has turned off his mobile phone. Or God says, I'm afraid I'm not going to fulfill your timetable. Generations in the past were okay with that. But we're finding that very difficult. Sorry, I'm preaching here. But what I'm saying is, these are big issues. And sometimes, of course, I go with a question to God, and God says, you're not on the right page. You're answering. You don't want an answer. You need the right question. So actually, sometimes the questions we have are the wrong questions. So what I'm saying is, keep it simple, but I'm saying there are some things which need meditation and understanding and obedience. I'm convinced about that more and more. That at times God says to me, I just want you to obey. Job is the classic example. Job is one of the most powerful books in the Bible. And Job comes to God and basically he says, why? Why suffering? Now, does God answer that question? He doesn't. Or what he does at the end, he just reveals that he is God. No answer. There is no answer. He just reveals, Job, you need to know who I am. And for Job in the end, that was enough. But I think culturally, in our time, we find that very difficult. And I love the phrase, and I've forgotten who said this. It wasn't Henri Nouwen, was a Catholic priest, and then left. Thank you, Brennan Manning. And he said he learned that God is everything to him and enough. God can be everything to him and enough for him, period. And God calls us ultimately that we find our life in him and him alone. That whatever happens, I'm saying this, but I realise there's a lot of challenge in this. That God says, if everything I have is taken away from me, everything I love, everything which comes from God anyway, by his providence. So it's actually not mine. It's there on trust. My wife, who I love deeply, my kids, who I love. If they were taken away from me, God still wants to be enough for me and everything to me. And I'm saying that, and I'm hoping that I never have to prove that. So there's a difference, isn't there, between being simple, but at the same time, these are profound truths, which are countercultural. Time's running out. Think about it. We'll move on. Beware of alliterations. Now, we were joking about this, and a short, something like craft, that can be very good, but sometimes alliterations can be a little bit forced. So in the end, if it's there, use it, but don't force it. Don't come up with, a really long alliteration, unless it's there. If it's there, fine, but don't force it. It's more important to be clear than cute, is the phrase. It's more important to be clear than cute. Okay?